Psychological Profile and Analysis of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which was the basis of the famous film version by Alfred Hitchcock. Introduction. Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, published in 1938, is a psychological thriller that delves deeply into themes of identity, obsession, and the pervasive influence of the past. The novel is structured around the life of its unnamed narrator, who finds herself overshadowed by the lingering presence of her husband, Maxim de Winter's first wife, Rebecca. As the story unfolds, the psychological complexities of the characters are revealed, exploring how past traumas, insecurities, and psychological manipulation shape their actions and perceptions. This analysis will examine the psychological dimensions of the characters and the narrative itself, highlighting how du Maurier creates a gripping exploration of human psychology. The Narrator, a study in insecurity and identity. The unnamed narrator of Rebecca is a young, inexperienced woman who marries the wealthy and older Maxim de Winter. Her lack of identity is symbolized by her anonymity. She is never named throughout the novel, contrasting sharply with the ever-present memory of Rebecca. The narrator's psychological journey is marked by intense insecurity and self-doubt, fueled by her constant comparisons to Rebecca, whom she perceives as the epitome of elegance, beauty, and social grace. From the outset, the narrator is acutely aware of her inferiority, both in social standing and in her relationship with Maxim. This insecurity is compounded by the oppressive atmosphere of Manderley, the De Winter estate, where Rebecca's presence seems to haunt every corner. The narrator's struggle with her identity is central to the novel, as she battles to assert herself in a world where she feels inadequate and out of place. Her psychological turmoil is evident in her self-effacing behavior, her reluctance to confront Maxim or others about her feelings, and her passive acceptance of the dominant personalities around her, particularly Mrs. Danvers, the housekeeper. The narrator's journey is one of psychological transformation as she gradually comes to understand the truth about Rebecca and Maxim's relationship. However, even as she gains strength and confidence, her identity remains tied to her role as Maxim's wife, and she never fully escapes Rebecca's shadow. This unresolved identity crisis adds to the novel's haunting and ambiguous ending, where the narrator is left to live with the consequences of the past, unable to fully reclaim her own sense of self. Maxim de Winter. Guilt, Trauma, and Repression. Maxim de Winter is a complex character whose psychological profile is shaped by guilt, trauma, and repression. On the surface, he appears to be a stoic and reserved figure, but beneath this exterior lies a man deeply tormented by his past actions. Maxim's first marriage to Rebecca was a facade, hiding the reality of a toxic and destructive relationship. Rebecca's manipulative and deceitful nature drove Maxim to commit an act of murder, which he has kept secret from the world. Maxim's repression of his guilt is a key aspect of his psychological makeup. He is unable to confront his own actions or the emotions associated with them, leading to a detachment from reality and from those around him, including his new wife. His inability to express his feelings creates a barrier between him and the narrator, contributing to her sense of isolation and insecurity. Maxim's psychological state is further complicated by his fear of exposure and the potential destruction of his social standing, which drives him to maintain the illusion of Rebecca as the perfect wife, even as he despises her memory. The revelation of the truth about Rebecca's death and Maxim's role in it serves as a turning point in the novel, both for Maxim and the narrator. However, even after this revelation, Maxim remains a psychologically damaged character, unable to fully come to terms with his actions or find peace. His relationship with the narrator is tainted by the unresolved trauma of his past, leaving them both trapped in a cycle of fear and uncertainty. Rebecca, the absent presence and narcissistic manipulation. Although Rebecca is never physically present in the novel, her influence is felt in every aspect of the story. She is the archetype of the absent presence, a character whose memory and impact dominate the lives of those she left behind. Rebecca's psychological profile can be understood through the lens of narcissism and manipulation. She is portrayed as a woman who was charming, beautiful, and socially adept, but also cruel, manipulative, and devoid of genuine emotion. Rebecca's narcissism is evident in her need for control and dominance over others. She manipulated those around her, including Maxim, whom she taunted with her infidelities and deceptions. Her need for power extended beyond her life, as she ensured that her memory would continue to haunt Manderley and those who lived there. Rebecca's psychological manipulation of Maxim is a central aspect of the novel's plot, as she drove him to the brink of madness and murder through her calculated actions. Rebecca's enduring presence in the novel highlights the power of memory and the psychological hold that the past can have on individuals. Even in death, Rebecca exerts control over Maxim and the narrator, shaping their actions and emotions. Her influence is a testament to the lasting impact of psychological manipulation and the ways in which toxic relationships can leave deep scars on those involved. Mrs. Danvers, Obsession and the Unresolved Grief. Mrs. Danvers, the sinister housekeeper of Manderley, represents another psychological facet of the novel, obsession and unresolved grief. Her unwavering loyalty to Rebecca and her hostility towards the narrator are rooted in a deep-seated obsession with her former mistress. Mrs. Danvers's psychological profile is characterized by an inability to let go of the past and an unhealthy fixation on Rebecca's memory. Mrs. Danvers' obsession with Rebecca is evident in her meticulous care of Rebecca's room, which she keeps as a shrine, and in her efforts to undermine the narrator, whom she views as an unworthy replacement. Her grief over Rebecca's death is unresolved, and she channels this grief into maintaining Rebecca's dominance over Manderley. Mrs. Danvers' actions throughout the novel are driven by her desire to preserve Rebecca's legacy, even at the cost of her own sanity. The climax of Mrs. Danvers' psychological unraveling occurs when she attempts to drive the narrator to suicide by convincing her that Maxim no longer loves her and that she can never live up to Rebecca. This moment of psychological manipulation is a culmination of Mrs. Danvers' obsession as she seeks to destroy what she perceives as a threat to Rebecca's memory. Ultimately, Mrs. Danvers' inability to move on from the past leads to her downfall, as she sets fire to Manderley, destroying the physical embodiment of Rebecca's influence, but also consuming herself in the process. The power of memory and the past. One of the central psychological themes of Rebecca is the power of memory and the inescapable influence of the past. The characters in the novel are all haunted by their memories. Maxim by the memory of Rebecca and his guilt over her death, the narrator by her constant comparisons to Rebecca, and Mrs. Danvers by her obsession with preserving Rebecca's legacy. These memories shape the characters' actions, emotions, and relationships, creating a sense of psychological entrapment. Du Maurier's exploration of memory is intricately tied to the setting of Manderley, which serves as a physical manifestation of the past. The house, with its hidden secrets and oppressive atmosphere, represents the weight of history that the characters cannot escape. The psychological impact of Manderley is particularly evident in the narrator, who feels suffocated by the house and its constant reminders of Rebecca. Her attempts to assert her own identity are continually thwarted by the omnipresence of Rebecca's memory, which permeates every aspect of life at Manderley. The novel also examines how the past can distort reality and create psychological illusions. Rebecca's memory is idealized by the characters, particularly the narrator, who views her as a paragon of perfection. However, as the truth about Rebecca is gradually revealed, it becomes clear that this idealization is a false construct, shaped by the character's fears, insecurities, and unresolved emotions. The psychological impact of these illusions is profound, as the characters are forced to confront the reality of their pasts and the ways in which they have been shaped by them. Themes of power and control. Power and control are recurring themes in Rebecca, explored through the psychological dynamics between the characters. Rebecca herself is a figure of power, both in life and in death, as she exerts control over those around her. Her manipulation of Maxim, her affairs, and her calculated actions all reflect her need for dominance. Even after her death, Rebecca maintains control over Manderley and its inhabitants, shaping their actions and emotions. Maxim's struggle for control is another key psychological element of the novel. His attempt to control his emotions, his secrets, and the narrative of his life is a central conflict. However, his repression and fear of exposure ultimately undermine his ability to maintain control, leading to his psychological unraveling. The narrator's journey is also one of seeking control over her identity, her relationship with Maxim, and her place at Manderley. Her initial passivity and insecurity are indicative of her lack of control, as she is constantly subjected to the influence of others, particularly Rebecca's lingering presence and Mrs. Danvers' manipulation. As the novel progresses, the narrator's psychological growth is marked by her attempts to reclaim control over her life and assert herself in the face of overwhelming odds. Mrs. Danvers' need for control is rooted in her obsession with Rebecca. Her efforts to preserve Rebecca's memory and undermine the narrator are driven by a desire to maintain the status quo and prevent any disruption to the power dynamic she had with Rebecca. Mrs. Danvers' actions are a reflection of her psychological dependence on Rebecca, and her ultimate failure to control the situation leads to her psychological collapse. The influence of Gothic elements on psychology. Rebecca is steeped in Gothic elements which play a significant role in shaping the psychological landscape of the novel. The setting of Manderley, with its dark corridors, hidden rooms, and oppressive atmosphere, creates a sense of unease and foreboding that mirrors the characters' psychological states. The use of Gothic motifs, such as the mysterious figure of Rebecca, the theme of the doppelganger, and the presence of a haunted house, all contribute to the novel's exploration of the darker aspects of the human psyche. The Gothic elements of Rebecca serve to heighten the psychological tension in the novel, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and suspense. The characters' fears and anxieties are amplified by the eerie and unsettling environment of Manderley, which becomes a character in its own right. The house is not just a backdrop for the story, but a reflection of the characters' inner turmoil, symbolizing the psychological entrapment they experience. The Gothic tradition in literature often explores themes of madness, the supernatural, and the uncanny, all of which are present in Rebecca. The psychological impact of these themes is evident in the narrator's increasing sense of disorientation and confusion as she navigates the labyrinthine world of Manderley. The novel's use of Gothic elements allows Du Maurier to delve deeply into the psychological depths of her characters, creating a story that is as much about the mind as it is about the events that unfold. The unresolved psychological conflict. One of the most striking aspects of Rebecca is the unresolved psychological conflict that pervades the novel. The characters are all grappling with unresolved emotions, past traumas, and psychological wounds that remain unhealed by the novel's conclusion. This lack of resolution is central to the novel's power, as it leaves the reader with a sense of lingering unease and ambiguity. The narrator's psychological journey, while marked by growth and a deeper understanding of the truth, does not lead to a complete resolution of her identity crisis. She remains unnamed, and her sense of self is still tied to her role as Maxim's wife and the shadow of Rebecca. The psychological scars of her time at Manderley are evident in the novel's final scenes, where she and Maxim live a nomadic existence, haunted by the past. Maxim's psychological state is similarly unresolved. Although he is freed from the immediate threat of exposure for Rebecca's murder, his guilt and trauma remain. The novel suggests that Maxim's psychological wounds will continue to affect him, leaving him in a state of perpetual unease. Mrs. Danvers' psychological conflict is resolved only through her ultimate destruction. Unable to move on from her obsession with Rebecca, she chooses to destroy Manderley rather than allow it to exist without Rebecca's influence. Her actions are a testament to the power of unresolved grief and the psychological toll it can take. The unresolved psychological conflict in Rebecca is a reflection of the novel's exploration of the complexities of the human mind. Du Maurier does not offer easy answers or tidy resolutions, but instead presents a nuanced and multifaceted portrait of psychological struggle. The characters are left to grapple with the consequences of their actions and emotions, creating a story that is as haunting as it is compelling. Conclusion: Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier is a masterful exploration of psychological themes, weaving together elements of identity, guilt, obsession, and the power of memory. Through the complex and nuanced portrayal of its characters, the novel delves deeply into the human psyche, revealing the ways in which past traumas, insecurities, and psychological manipulation shape the lives of individuals. The novel's use of Gothic elements enhances its psychological impact, creating an atmosphere of tension and unease that mirrors the characters' inner turmoil. At its core, Rebecca is a story about the inescapable influence of the past and the ways in which it can distort reality and create psychological illusions. The characters are all haunted by their memories, and their actions are driven by the unresolved emotions and conflicts that arise from their experiences. Du Maurier's novel remains a powerful and timeless exploration of the darker aspects of the human mind, offering a profound and unsettling look at the complexities of identity, guilt, and the psychological scars that shape our lives.